Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023, week 32. That's August 7th to August 13th. And we are going to start out by wiring up the oil pressure sensor. So in the case of my sensor, there are 3 wires going to it, a sensor plus 5, a sensor ground, and then the oil pressure sender signal. So right there, that's the red, which is the sensor plus 5, the black, the ground, and then the gray, which is the sender signal wire. So I've done a bunch of these connections before. So what I'm doing here is I'm just comparing to the stock Holley connector, and I'm just making sure that I get all the pins in the right place. And so now on the laptop, I'm just checking to see that I do have oil pressure, at least a reading, and I did, but I was also getting a fuel pressure reading. So I'm double checking the pinout on this, and I realized very quickly that my pinout was wrong. So I very quickly fix it. It should be the same as the oil pressure sensor, and I plug it back in, and I'm still having an issue. So right now, like, the fuel pressure is reading, 80 and then like 55 pounds. Like, there's no reason why I should have any fuel pressure at all. I've never had any fuel in the system. So it's very clear that's a bad sensor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to double check that I have a bad sensor. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the oil pressure sensor off that I just wired up. I'm going to plug it into the fuel pressure sensor line. And yep, sure enough, I see that I now have 0 fuel pressure. And when I plug in, I think I plugged the fuel pressure into the oil pressure and it shows bad. So yeah, plug it in, and clearly I've got a pile. I know that kind of went off screen really quick, but yeah. So I confirmed I have a bad sensor, and it's quite possible that because I had it miswired and I plugged it in, that it fried the sensor, or it's possible it was dead on arrival. Not sure. In any case, no matter what, it's not covered under Holley warranty because I bought this stuff 2 years ago anyways. So I'm gonna have to buy a new sensor. So here we're just going to quickly reinstall the fuel pressure sensor, or oil pressure sensor, sorry. Alright, so what I'm going to do next is this supercharger belt. To me, it looks like it's not perfectly straight between the crank pulley and the procharger pulley. It looks like there's a little tiny bit of an angle right in the middle. So what I'm doing is I'm just pulling the tensioner pulley off, and I'm getting a straight edge across the front of the crank pulley and against the front of the procharger pulley, just to see how much of a gap there is. And it's not perfectly flat. I think there's about a 1/16 of an inch of flex there. So so I don't think that it was ever perfectly flat. So I don't know if it's going to throw a belt. I'm just going to have to put it back together and check and see and hope that it doesn't throw a belt, but it very well might. I know the belt's also going to stretch out a bit as this runs. So hopefully after we get some kilometers on the car, the belt stretches out a bit, and then when I tension, I'll be able to give it a bit more tension, and then, you know, also there won't be, you know, as much angle between the two pulleys, but we just got to see, run it and see what happens first. All right, with the pulley back on, what we are going to do is we are going to move over and we're going to start blowing all of the AN lines out with air. So when you build these hoses, as you've seen me do numerous times, you have to cut the hoses. I use a cutoff wheel, and that puts all sorts of crap in the hose. Well, you don't want to be running fuel through these with all of that crap in there. It'll plug up injectors. It'll do, you know, a lot of bad things potentially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the lines at the front, disconnect the lines at the back, blow some air through the lines to hopefully get a good chunk of that, you know, garbage out of the lines. So as we go back up to the front of the car, you can kind of see there's a bunch of black rubber on the ground under the car in the front now. And that's all from blowing these lines out. And that's why I did it, is because I do not want that stuff ending up in, you know, the fuel injectors, the fuel rail, the fuel return, any of that. So now that we've blown out the fuel hoses, what we're going to do is we are going to build another hose to go from the back of the intake over to the brake booster. So that's going to be a -6 line. I got a 90, I think, coming off that brake booster. No, that's about a 30. And I got a 90 coming off the back of the intake. So that's just going to loop up and over all of the wiring. And you've seen me make a ton of these hoses, so I don't think I really need to do much more talking while I'm doing it. And there we have it. Beautiful line going from the back of the intake over to the brake booster. Up next, we are going to build the last line for the clutch. So I've got some of the -4 PTFE fittings in, so I am just going to do up one of those lines. While I'm under here, I'm just going to tighten down all of these fittings since they've just been kind of put on loose. And I get a bit distracted here and I start pulling all of the tape off the collector since I'm under here. Off the headers. I pull the tape off of the headers. Well, and the collectors too, but these are the header tubes and the collectors are down lower and I pull that off too. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Pulling all the tape off. Now that I've got those clutch lines on, let's just tighten down those fittings on the actual master. Next up, we need to connect the ground that goes from the coils to the back of the head. So that's that gray wire that's kind of sitting there in the bottom middle of the screen. We're going to run that around and to the back of the head, put a connector on it, bolt it up. So next up, we just got the intake box down, and I am getting the plenum hardware so I can start getting the plenum installed on the car. So one thing that I do a lot is I read a lot of the instructions. So I'm just kind of showing you here that I'm not infallible. I don't know everything. I actually have to look up the part that I have and read the instructions and make sure I'm doing things correctly. So this right here is the gasket for the upper and lower plenum. What you do is you get this laid out in the groove, and then where the two pieces overlap, take a Sharpie, mark it, and then with it marked, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the bench. I'm going to take a very sharp razor blade, and I'm going to cut down through both of those at the exact same time and the exact same place. With the Sharpie overlapping it. So just like that, go down with a brand new razor blade, and that will make a perfect cut exactly where I need it. Once I have it cut exactly where I want it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of super glue, and I'm going to put a little dab on one end or both ends, I don't remember, and then I'm actually going to super glue the two ends together, and that forms a pretty solid bond. And then as a little bit of extra added protection just where that joint is, I'm going to add just a tiny little dab of RTV gasket maker, just, for that little tiny extra bit of insurance. What I'm doing right now is I'm just grabbing a little cap full of engine oil. So when I put those studs into when I put the nuts on the studs for the plenum, there's a little bit of oil, and that will give me an accurate torque reading. Right, I forgot. There's only two studs, and then the rest are bolts. So the two studs go in the middle left because that's where the plenum throttle body sits, and there just isn't enough room to get bolts in there. But right there, I just put a little dab of RTV right around the join point. You don't need a whole ton of it. It's just a little bit of added protection. And then I set the plenum down on the two studs, and that gives me a pretty good lineup. I just lifted it up just to make sure that the gasket didn't move in any way when I put it down. And here I dip the bolts in a little bit of engine oil, and then I just start threading them into the intake. So under the throttle body here, there's 2 nuts that go on the studs, and you can't torque them down, so I just tighten them down to approximately the same torque as the rest of them. Now on my phone, I'm getting the instructions for the plenum, or maybe it's the high ram intake, I don't remember. But I am following the torque pattern specifications in the instructions, so that's why I've got the phone on top, because that'll give me the pattern, and I can just follow the pattern. Now that the intake's on, we're just going to do a quick little bit of cleanup. And we're going to get right back into this. We need to connect the TPS sensor, and we need to connect the idle air control IAC idle air control motor. And I think because I wired one of the sensors wrong, I unplugged the TPS. I actually flip a couple of the wires around, and then I think I'm just like, wait a second, let's just read the diagram. Let's see what the diagram says. And then if I recall correctly, I actually end up flipping it back because I had it wired correctly the first time. And so yeah, here I am comparing it to the connector that comes from like the pressure sensors, and it's actually different, if I recall correctly. And yeah, the power and the ground on the TPS is flipped from what it is on the pressure and sensors. So kind of messed with me, but hey, the TPS sensor works, the fuel and oil pressure sensors are working, so I'm not going to stress about it too much, other than just knowing in the back of my mind that it is a difference. Now that I have the TPS connected, what I need to do is a TPS Autoset. So I just connected the laptop to the software, and I told it I'm going to do a TPS Autoset, and then you just saw me go and open and close and open and close the throttle blade all the way, and that is what sets the TPS Autoset. So now I'm just trying to reconnect to the Dominator. It's not working, so I reboot. While that's happening, I got some new spark plugs to put in this thing. So these are Autolite. I don't remember what the number is, but they are 1 heat range colder than stock, which is kind of what you want for a blower application. So that's what I'm using, and we'll see if it works. Hopefully it does. And right now I am just Googling spark plug gap for a small block Ford that's boosted, and the consensus, well, I shouldn't say the consensus, but one of the things I got was about 28 thou. So that's what I'm going to gap these two. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but hopefully it'll get the car running. And with the spark plugs in, I threw a bunch of garbage on the floor, so we're going to clean up a little bit. And what's the other piece of the puzzle when you have spark plugs? Well, you need spark plug wires. So I'm taking all of these spark plug wires off of my old distributor. These are Ford Racing, like 9mm spark plug wires. And I'm just going to reuse them for now. Hopefully they should fit and work. I hope they do. So I'm just kind of throwing them in there loosely. And of course, at this point in time, if I used the original boot and angle, it would hit the headers. So on the engine side, I'm just going to go with a quick little 90 down and get it out of the way, and that should be okay. Alright, so plug wires are in. The next thing we're going to try and do is we are going to try and install a dipstick tube. So this is Canton's universal dipstick tube, and of course the headers are in the way. So we are going to need to bend this dipstick tube to get it out of the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a TIG rod. I'm going to put it in the oil pan and kind of get the distance measured, and that will help me figure out. By having the TIG rod, I can bend the TIG rod. It's very pliable, and that will help me figure out what angles I need on this dipstick tube in order to make it fit and make it work. So as you can see, I've done a couple of bends on the tube now, and so what do? Hey, can the dipstick still fucking feed in there? And no, it can't. There is no chance of it getting past those two bends, which means I just destroyed that dipstick tube. I could probably straighten it out and make it work, but I got other shit to do. I'm not that worried about it, so I am just going to continue on with something else right now. And that's something else that I'm going to continue on with is just simply putting oil in the engine. So I need to put 7 quarts in the pan, and then I need to fill up the oil filter, and then I need to, well, that's actually it. That's all I need is 7 in the oil pan and 2 I think it's like half quart in the filter. Those are 5 quart jugs. And so what I do is, I remember I never tightened up the oil drain plug, so I quickly run under there and tighten up both of the drains so that I don't, lose all of the oil that I'm putting in. But yeah, so what I do is I fully put 1 container into the engine, and then what I do is I put that container on the ground, I take the funnel, put it in the original container, and then I put 2 more quarts in it. So I just take my full 5 quart container and I fill 2 quarts into the old container. That way I know I have 7 quarts in the engine / pan. And that seemed like the smartest way to do it. As I just showed you, it's up to the 2 quart level, and here we go. Now I'm just taking oil with the filter on the ground. I'm just filling the filter with oil. I'm letting it sit for a few seconds, let all the air bubbles come out of it. And I mean, this whole process took, I don't know, probably 3 to 5 minutes to fully fill this filter until there was no more air bubbles. And I even kind of rock it left and rock it right just to make sure all the air is out of it. All right, that is one very, very full oil filter. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to try and get it spun on without throwing a whole ton all over the floor and all over the engine and everything. And I actually managed it. I didn't really spill any. I was quite surprised with myself. So now that I have oil in the engine, what I want to do is pull the distributor out, and then I have a oil pump drive shaft, so I can attach it to my drill, and then I can spin the oil pump with a drill. That will put oil throughout the entire engine, and that will allow me to check and make sure that the oil pressure sensor is working. I have oil pressure. I didn't, screw something up on the oil pump or something like that, and that's just a very good easy way to check without anything running, because as soon as you crank the engine or try and fire it, it's doing, I think cranking is, the engine thinks it's firing around 300 RPM. So we're cranking at like 200 RPM, and if there's no oil pressure, that's metal on metal for 200 RPM, which is just, it's not a good thing. So by priming the oil system, you're making sure that everything is working as it should be. So what I'm doing is I'm just hooking the laptop up to the ECU, and that will allow me to spin the oil pump drive shaft and then see that it's building and reading pressure. But of course, something's always got to go wrong. My drill will not fit on the drive shaft with the intake on. Even with the alternator out of the way, turning it sideways, I tried a few things, it just does not work. So you might be thinking, oh, how convenient, you have this, blue 90-degree drill attachment. Well, I ran out to Canadian Tire and I bought this just so I could hopefully check oil pressure in the car. So I know you can't really see the laptop screen, but I hook up the drill and then I put it in reverse and I get oil pressure, and I am pumped that I have oil pressure. I think I have something like 75 pounds of oil pressure, which is good. There is nothing wrong with that. And so, yeah, I'm just super excited. I'm taking a video in the car right now with my cell phone of the gauge in the car. And so when I come back outside and I, drill backwards and build pressure, I actually get to see the gauge inside the car moving, which is super exciting for me because I love those gauges. I love the fact that it's all working. Like, that's just so awesome. All right, so with that done, what I have to do is I'm going to put the distributor back in. I'm going to retime the distributor. I haven't moved the engine off of 50 degrees before top dead center from the first time I timed it. So I know the engine is still in the right place to time this. So that's what I'm going to quickly do. So with the engine timed, at this point in time, I believe I have gotten a new fuel pressure sensor in, and this one comes from Low Dollar Motorsports. The sensor is very similar to the Holley one. It is a little bit larger, so it won't fit. If you got it in a really tight spot, it won't fit in there. But it is also, I think, 3 to 4 times less cost. So I think I picked up 3 of these sensors so I could have a couple of spares for the price of one of Holley's. So, you know, pros and cons to everything. The pro, cheaper. Con, slightly bigger form factor, which where it's going doesn't bother me any. Right there, what I'm doing is I'm routing the procharger surge valve air line down to where it needs to be. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to undo the procharger dipstick. That's that little flathead screw there in that line, and we are going to dump in 4 ounces of procharger oil. This process does take a little while. I take a knife, I just puncture a hole in the top of it just so that, you know, I can get the fluid out a little bit easier. Yeah, so now we're just gonna, you know, put the dipstick in, check it, make sure that we've got the correct amount of oil, and we do. I wouldn't have expected anything less. And the next fluid that we need to put in the car is transmission fluid. So this takes, I think it's 3.75 liters or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is. You should look up, if you're putting transmission fluid in your car, look up your transmission specifications and make sure you're putting in the correct amount of fluid. Don't go by what I say or anyone else says. Cool, so with the fluid in, I can now just throw the transmission shifter on top, and the reason why, if you don't, well, the shifter tunnel is open to all of the gears and stuff, so if you were to try firing this up, you'd have oil splashing all over the place. So I cleaned up all of the old gaskets or all of the old sealer. So now I'm just using a little tiny bit of RTV along the outside of this just to make sure that it seals and no fluid escapes. Now that the shifter is in, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to test the reverse lockout on this. So on this car, if you go, I believe it's right and up, that's reverse. Yeah, so what I'm showing you here is with the key off, the shifter only goes so far because the reverse lockout solenoid hasn't been triggered, and then when I go key on, because I'm under 5 miles an hour, I can move the shifter over further because it's released the lockout solenoid. So that's working. I'm so happy that it's working. And what I'm doing is I'm going underneath, I'm removing a little bit more of the tape, and I'm just going to very quickly check and make sure that I've got the right amount of fluid. So the bottom is the drain plug, the top is the fill plug. And generally speaking, if you undo the fill plug, there should be a little tiny bit of fluid that drips out, and that's totally fine. You'll see when I loosen off the top fill plug that a little tiny bit does drip out. I don't even get the plug out fully because I don't want it to really gush out of there. But yeah, so you can see there's a little tiny bit dribbling down the side of the transmission. So that is good to go. I'm happy with that. No complaints there. So the fourth fluid that I would need is clutch fluid, and that's just regular .3 brake fluid. I look at this, it's an open container. I know it's been sitting there open since I last raced, which was over 1.5 years ago. Brake fluid is, I forget what it's called, but it absorbs moisture, so it potentially absorbed a bunch of moisture from the air, so I don't really want to use it, so I'm just going to skip the clutch at this point. I don't need the clutch to fire the car anyways. And with that, I'm going to move over to working back on fuel lines. So I do need to make a fuel line to go from the bulkhead to the return line, and then that'll go up into the tank. Well, everyone, that is all the time that we have for this week. So as always, if you stuck around this long, I would like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.